I'm Margaret 0rdonez, and I recently retired from the University of Rhode Island, where I was the director of the Historic Costume and Textile Collection and taught textile conservation. They have a graduate program there in textile conservation. And I have moved to Tennessee, and I am setting up a textile conservation business in Tennessee. I've been a member of CSA since 1978, probably, and I joined because I had gotten my master's degree in historic costume, historic textiles, and it was just a logical extension of what I was studying and teaching. I probably found out about the Costume Society from faculty members who had mentored me, maybe both at the University of Tennessee and at Florida State University. And so it was from faculty members. One of the most valuable early experiences I had with CSA was that CSA sponsored a workshop at Michigan State. And I can look it up, I don't know exactly what year it was. Maybe late 70s, actually, probably in the 70s. And it was on care of collections. And I was actually one of the speakers, but was one of the learners also there. And it was at least a day. And there was a publication from that, which I still have a copy of, from that workshop. One of the things I remembered from that workshop was that one of the speakers was talking about, and the speakers weren't necessarily all professional. It was people who had collections. It was talking about having problems with children's clothing or doll clothing that they had in their collection, that when she ironed it, it would stick to the ironing board. And Claudia Kidwell and Ann Coleman were reactors. It was a well-planned workshop because there were reactors that would react. They were on the edge of their seat. They couldn't wait to get up and refute and talk about peeling your things you were ironing off of an ironing board. It was very valuable for me. I was just beginning to teach textile conservation at Kansas State at that point, and that we had not had classes in the United States in conservation, textile conservation. And so it was a very valuable workshop for me. And I enjoyed presenting. And I don't even remember what I presented on. I'd have to look back at the program to see what I presented on. It was valuable having the experts there too. I've known Martha Grimm for over 40 years. I was teaching at Kansas State University. I was an instructor. I'd just finished my PhD and went there. And the department head suggested that I teach, I asked to teach a class in textile conservation. And she and the dean supported that, which was a new idea. And so I taught summer workshops. And Martha was working on her master's, so she came by. She was there one summer, and I met her. She wasn't in my class that summer, but I met her. Then she graduated, but we were required to teach extension classes, which means we had to drive to Kansas City to teach a class. And Martha took a historic costume class. That was an extension class that I taught in Kansas City. And so I got to know her. I hadn't met her, and I got to know her better while she was in my class. Then she moved to St. Louis and was an intern with 0rdonez Perkins, who had been in my first textile conservation class at Kansas State. And so while she was working as an intern with Zoe, and I've always kept up with Zoe, we got to know each other better. And the three of us have kind of been the three musketeers since then. Martha is near my age, and Zoe's younger, of course, but Martha and I share a birthday on Halloween. So we oftentimes go to CSA or TSA or AIC, some of the meetings, and do something extra. So that lifelong friendships. The I was in the region, of course, when CSA met at Hartford. And so we were trying to think of what would be appropriate for us to offer the people coming to Hartford. And we thought it was a unique opportunity for me to use the graduate students from the University of Rhode Island to set up Care of Collections workshop. And we had tables set out all around the room. I gave introductions in the morning, and in the afternoon, people could go from table to table to table for demonstrations on Care of Collections. And so that idea of offering something as far as Care of Collections continued then until just recently. We've had some kind of workshop on Care of Collections, and the members of CSA benefited. We also pulled in people from the community if they wanted to participate, but the members certainly benefited from that. And something else that was new that year was that the American Institute for Conservation has an Angels Project, and they work on paper and seldom textiles or statuary metals and things like that at a site near where the national meeting is being held. So I thought CSA could do that. So we set up and a little further than we wanted geographically, but there was a collection in the lower part of Connecticut, and we set up an Angels Project. Susan Jerome and I set that first Angels Project up, and it went over really well. We had something like maybe 18 or so angels or volunteers who were CSA members who came in, and we worked on a collection in North Stonington, or in Stonington, Connecticut. It was a beautiful setting, and they furnished us food, and so it was worth the drive down to Stonington from Hartford to do that. And so, unfortunately, Susan couldn't continue the next year. She wasn't going to CSA the next year, and so I asked Martha Graham if she would do that part, which was the organization part. I was teaching and being director of the collection and the conservation lab, and so I was busy. So setting up, talking to the volunteers, setting up the site, getting supplies and everything, I needed help with. And Martha agreed, and she's been great. She's very organized and dedicated and has been willing to give the time to do that, make the contacts and keep up with what's going on, keep up with the money part of it. So it's worked out. She's done that, and then I've just gone in and directed the day. I consult with her during the year. We talk about, and one of the two of us usually visits the site according geographically, which is the logical one to go to that site, and ahead of time, so that we can plan what's going to go. Then we go a day early and set it up so that when the angels come in on the day of the project, everything is ready for them to walk in and get started. We select the site that has a costume collection that needs help. But we select sites that probably have a costume committee, or it's in an educational institution where there'll be some continuation of the use of the collection after we're there. And so what we do actually depends upon what's needed at that site. But generally, we photograph objects, document them, meaning to date them and describe them, And then, the first thing we try to do is vacuum them. And then after they're vacuumed, documented, photographed, then we prepare them for storage, because a lot of places have not had adequate storage or correct storage. With that first site, we even had things that were just thrown on the floor that we picked up. And at the end of the day, then, they're in a box with like objects labeled and vacuumed and photographed and documented. So that's generally what we do. In some places we've made hangars in addition. After Katrina, when we were down in the 9th Ward at a military site down there, we cut, for hours, we cut little plastic mylar circles that would go under buttons that had been corroded by the salt water from the floods that occurred after Katrina. And so what we do is generally the same, but varies some. And this year was the first year we've worked with a theater collection, a historic collection from have been things that have been isolated that students use for inspiration or copy to make reproductions. If an institution has a collection that they have only been collecting and not necessarily taking good care of, and they hire somebody, or somebody volunteers to go in and offer advice. Of course, good storage is essential. So might consider looking at storage, and I've seen good and bad, and that's certainly getting things off of wire hangers, getting garments off of wire hangers, getting things off of a floor, or into, if there's financial support enough, to get things into acid-free boxes rather than grocery store or department store boxes. But many things have survived because they were in grocery store boxes, but or getting them at least lined with acid-free tissue or cloth, cotton cloth that can be laundered. So storage might be one of the first things. Another thing would be is what's there relevant to the time period that that institution represents. You're lucky if you have a time period that's set so there's a beginning and end. If not, you probably, the collection may contain just odds and ends from lots of different time periods. One of the things I encourage people when I go to visit is that they shouldn't be what I call a vacuum cleaner collection. People will clean out their closets, get a tax deduction, and just bring everything. And so you have to be really hard-nosed and say, oh, this is lovely, but we already have one. It doesn't represent our time period or a time period, because sometimes something has been remodeled so that it doesn't fit any. It's not a good example of a specific time period. Maybe the condition is not good enough, and in fact, that's one of the criteria for looking at what's in the collection. If the collection is going to be exhibited, then are things there in good enough condition? And if you have a 19th century silk that's shattering, and there's no possible way of exhibiting it, or maybe not even using it for a study piece, then think about deaccessioning. Then you have to consider, are you a city or a state institution, and can you deaccession? I was always very concerned about deaccessioning until I found out the library does it all the time. So that's a clue. If the library gets by with deaccessioning, and then clothing collections should be too. And you could always deaccession to another institution. It doesn't have to be to Goodwill or the wastebasket. because other institutions that are developing collections can oftentimes use. We've been giving things to Western Michigan, who's starting a new collection. And so that's a good way to deaccession. So storage, making sure that you need what you have, and being careful what you take in, and to document what you take in. The stories that go with these things, think of all those things that are in collections that the history that they have has not been kept. And so documentation is so important as you take things in. And that's another reason for deaccessioning. If something doesn't really fit and you have no history with it, if it's not a good study piece, then maybe deaccessioning is a good solution for it. It's been interesting since I started with CSA and have been on the board a couple of times to see how far we have gone and how well organized we are as we have grown. Alicia Annis and Kay Boyer did a super job of maybe making us micromanage the board, micromanage less, and to think about the future. And I'd got to give her credit, yeah. Well, both of them, credit for starting us on our way. And look where we've gotten, look where we are now. I think that the CSA is a very inclusive group of people. They're very friendly. Newcomers find themselves being very welcome. It's not a cliquish sort of thing. There's a variety of ages, which is interesting. It's good. It's healthy to have these young people and excited young people in our organization. And so people coming for the first time find it to be very welcoming, particularly if they're willing to go up and introduce themselves and talk to people. There's a lot of talking going on and sharing. And that's one of the values of CSA is networking. To know who to call. You have something and you need an opinion, to ask somebody. If they don't know, they know somebody who probably does know. That has been invaluable. Professionally, that has been invaluable.